Welcome to the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, the show dedicated to bring you the news from the oil patch deep in the heart of Texas, with your hosts, Ryan Ray and Josh Shelton.
We're back with the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast. We appreciate you tuning in today's episode. This is episode 194. 194. I'm your host, Josh Shelton, my friend and co-host, Ryan Ray. Ryan, any more 2 to 3 star ratings reviews come in, or is it all 5 stars this week?
Hey, we did it, my man. We did it. We hit 300. We did it.
Did we?
Yes, we did. And it's perfect timing because it wasn't a written one. It was just a 5-star. Just click 5-star. Which we take 5-star written or clicking. Don't care. Just 5 stars. That's the rule. So 300 5-star reviews. And this is our 4-year anniversary show, Josh. 4 years. I think our first episode, I had it pulled up a minute ago to close it out, was on March 2nd or 3rd of 2017. March 2nd or 3rd of 2017, something like that. So it's been 4 years, man. That's crazy.
4 years. Ain't that something?
And think about all the stuff that's happened in 4 years.
Yeah, so we've had a TV show host become president. No, he was already in.
He was already president when we started.
Yeah.
March 3rd, 2017. So 2 days from today is when our first show aired. And I don't know if that was actually when, I don't know if we released it later or not. Let's see here. I can go back to that. Let's see here. Is we probably recorded a day before, huh? March 3rd, 017.
Probably, yeah.
That would have been, for all those who are curious. No, we released it the same day because we recorded on Fridays back then. So we recorded and released it on the 3rd. So 4 years ago, man. That's crazy. So thanks everyone for listening, for tuning in. Share the show around, let folks know what's going on. We've been here for 4 years, and the votes haven't been tallied. The Dominion servers aren't exactly working, but we might do another 4. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with all that. But to do another 4, Josh, we need the listeners' help. So we have 5-star reviews. Also, be sure to go and to sign up for the War Room newsletter that helps support the show. It's $10 a month. We throw in a discount code in there to help you folks out. I think it's was it 30% off? I don't know. It's a pretty good deal. Anyways, we'll throw a discount code in the show notes for folks to check it out. If you want Nate to come back, which I understand, and listen, you can sign up and say, I want my money to go to Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, but not Nate. That's we will take that. But the War Room newsletter is how you can support the show. We would love to have you do that. And oh, by the way, Josh, I don't know if you saw the feed or not. We had on your boy Ted Cruz the other day.
I saw that
inside the War Room, and so I ran that for free on this podcast feed as well. So hey, listen, moving on up in the world, my man. Things are going good. So be sure to sign up.
Yeah, that was interesting. Interesting interview you did there. It seemed like it went by really quick though. 23 minutes. I don't know if it's because he's a talker, or it was just a couple of things he said, but it seemed like that 20 minutes just went. I mean, how many questions did you get out? Like 4 or 5? It just seemed like it flew by.
Yeah, so a little inside baseball here. It was scheduled for 10 to 15, and so he hops on at 2:50, and I said, "Do you have any questions before I hit record?" Nope, I hit record. And so we're going, and I realize that I'm not going to get to nearly much the energy stuff that I wanted to get to. I was going to do China first and then energy, because originally last year when I talked about having him on is about China. And so I wanted to kind of touch some of the China stuff. And so they text me, his press secretary texts me, says you can go to instead of 205, you go to 215, or not 210. 9:50, so 10:15. So instead of going to 9:05, 10:05, you can go to 10:15. So I got extra 10 minutes. So if you go back and listen to the interview, at the 15-minute mark is when it was supposed to be ended. And so I got extra 10 minutes, or we wouldn't even got that in. And so
wow,
you're right. It was kind of just a bang, 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 just trying to get through it. And, one thing we do on this show and all the shows I do on, we try to let our guests talk. And so, if they just go on and on and on, and just, try to let them get their piece out there, and they can hear us bloviate about it later. So.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that we wanted to hit on. So last week we were talking about what was oil going to do this week with all the shutdowns, but from the cold, some of these refineries had shut down, some of these ports were closed. So apparently, people are actually, the title of this article is Whispers of $100 Oil 2022. So in options trading, there are actually options for oil at $100 a barrel at the end of 2022. It's going up from like 60 to like 3,000 options that are trading right now. So it's a super bullish take. But Goldman Sachs, they did come out and say that they're thinking that, I think third or fourth quarter this year, they're thinking that oil is going to be back to 75. Yeah, third quarter this year, Goldman Sachs anticipates $75 oil. The big question there is going to be OPEC, right? I mean, what are they going to do next month, or what is it, April or May when they're supposed to revisit?
No, they meet here this week, I believe. Maybe the 3rd, something like that. Let's see here. It's soon. It's soon. OPEC meeting is on. I can't find it, but it's soon. I want to say it's this week. March 4th. Yeah, so March 4th.
Okay, so this week they're going to be meeting.
Yeah, so
I mean, what?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I say the thing that's been interesting is if you follow someone like maybe Mark Rosano or Big Oren on Twitter or other folks, and also had a Nasal Haji on Inside the War Room last week too, so folks go check that out. But there's kind of, you have the paper market which is being traded, and then you have the physical market, which is what's actually there. And there's kind of a sentiment that says that the paper market has kind of detached itself from reality to the physical market. And so Big Oren has a thread I retweeted at Refinery Senior on Twitter, and I'll try to link to it in the show notes. It says, here are the reasons I believe the physical oil market is nowhere near as tight as people believe it is. A, tight market is usually equated to supply-demand balance plus the amount of spare capacity in the market. At the moment, there's a huge amount of spare capacity that can return quickly. B, there's also a high level of excess inventories. Any lost spare of capacity at moment is such that spare capacity will be significantly in excess of normal. Therefore, the perception of shortage of oil is overhyped. And he goes on to break it down. So it doesn't mean that that prices can not go up, a little bit higher or whatever. It's just that the price to kind of believe that the prices can't go down is a little bit premature. Also, there was, and Rosano, I don't know if I can find his report on this, but he had a report on talking about the actual sale of oil from West Africa, I believe it was, and how they're having a hard time actually getting the sales. And this is some of the best oil in the world. They were having a hard time getting it to go to market, so people weren't looking to buy it. So I think, yeah, there are people who are very optimistic about the market, but I also think there's plenty of reasons that people are suspect about what's going on. So on the show, just so people know, we know that you listen to us, and we appreciate that. And so we're kind of always hesitant to take a too strong of a stance one way or another, because it's easy to be flippant about these things, and so trying to respect it. So I personally think the market's a little bit overpriced. Doesn't mean it might not go back up, but if we saw $70 oil for the rest of the year, I would be surprised. That's kind of my take on it.
So there's a article over here. I mentioned the refineries. So right now, a lot of the refineries, due to the cold, were shut in. So they are trying to race to get back on, because with the oil price where it is, there's margins for them to make good money. And so they are, from what I'm seeing, they are working diligently to try to get everything back up and running. Let's see, they have crude processing since February. Yeah, I think they're hoping to be up and running by April, based on some of the reports that I'm seeing here. So it's an opportunity for people to maybe capitalize and make a little money when stuff's been pretty hard this year. So hopefully, get it while you can.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, as you say, they're going to race to get back. And so the question when they get back is, where will prices be? And so the Saudi thing is interesting, because we look at today, the Saudis took off 1 million barrels a day earlier this year. I think everyone expects them to put the 1 million barrels a day back on here this week, or, well, it won't be this week, but they'll announce to put it back on this week. And then you're going to have to see what Russia and the other OPEC plus members, what they're saying. And so, so if they announce it, I think timeline right here, they announce it today, it won't be until for April and May. So it won't be like coming on the market next week or anything. I think it's for April, May, maybe May, June though. I don't remember off the top of my head. But anyways, so it's at least a month out before this will come back on the market. Of course, you should see rising demand in the U.S. as the weather gets warmer. People consider going on vacations, spring break, school getting out, stuff like that. So, we'll see how all that shakes out. But yeah, I'm curious to see. I think the Saudis will put the beam back on. Will that be enough to level off prices or keep them from going to be more? I don't know. I think the Saudis, in their standpoint, have to be careful because if they don't do something to stop the price from going up to $70, $80 a barrel, then you will see the shale producers going out there trying to drill as much as possible. And why wouldn't they? As you made the point, Josh, if you can make the money, why not? So I'm curious to see if we might see a little bit more from the Saudis than normal. I would be stunned if they don't put more than or they don't put less than $1 million on. I think $1 million is kind of the bottom.
Kind of what I think at least $1 million is coming back on this week.
Yeah, I don't know if they do. I don't know if they do more or not. But I think $1 million. I think they had to put that million back on. I don't see how they can't. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's an article that came out. This is about a week old. This is from the 22nd. Says that Saudis and Russia differ again on oil strategy before the OPEC Plus meeting that's happening this week. Never like to see that. That gives us PTSD.
I'm about to say we are almost a year out from the day when the price war happened. When was that? That was
February.
No, it was March. It was March, but it would have been like March. Yeah, it'd be like March 12th or something. Because it was like a week before the shutdowns. Because that was.
Well, I was thinking the shutdowns were March 12th and March 10th. I was thinking the second week of March. So I must be wrong.
Yeah, March 7th, I think is the day. Yeah, so on March 8th, which would have been the Saturday, the Saudis initiated price war. So on March 7th was the day that the Russians announced that they weren't going to play nice. And then the 8th, so the 7th would have been the OPEC meeting where the Russians walk out like, hey, screw you guys. And then the 8th would have been that Saturday night. Oh, no, so 6th and 7th. Okay. Yeah, so Friday's the 6th, then it would have been Saturday the 7th, and then the 8th. So that would have been the week. So, God, that's almost a year ago to the day by the time this podcast comes out. That's crazy.
It is.
And then the lockdowns would have happened like within a week, like you said, the 12th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably about right. So, yeah, because I went down to Houston on the 11th last year to meet with some folks, and that was the night that Trump announced the travel ban, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, so that would have been, yeah, that'd been right. God, it's hard to believe it's been a year. Now, I felt like last year was 16 years long. Yeah, that'd been it. So, yeah, so here we are. Happy world ending week.
Yeah.
Oh, gracious. So.
All right, today we have a guest from Enverus, Nick Volkov. He's the VP of Intelligence with Enverus. Nick, great to have you on the show today. Been looking forward to this interview for a little while. Great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks, Ryan. Happy to be here.
This is a little bit awkward here. You're the Vice President of Intelligence. The two hosts of this podcast have never been associated with intelligence, so make sure you kind of dumb it down for us as we get into this, because I'm not sure we have much to contribute to this conversation. But what does the VP of Intelligence do? Like just out of curiosity, before we get into like the meat and potatoes here, like how does one get that title?
I think to answer that, it might make sense to just talk a little bit about the where we came from at Enverus. So intelligence, that's what we refer to as research. So have you guys ever heard of RS Energy Group?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So for those unfamiliar, RS Energy Group, we've been around for about 20 years and were acquired by Enverus about a year ago. And really what we made a name for ourselves in the market was talking to the institutional community and looking at kind of trying to stress test some of the assumptions out there in the oil and gas world and do a lot of our own independent analytics to come down with different investment ideas. So we were originally called Research. A few years ago, we rebranded as Intelligence. But really what we're trying to do is be an independent voice within the market and try to look at what the data says and bring that up to an investment idea. So, we'll look at different parts of a play, do our own independent type curve forecasting, economic forecasting, and now what we're also looking into is a company's ESG footprint as well, to try to ultimately roll that up to something that makes sense in a easy to digest way.
Well, Josh, I think that we've kind of got our marching orders now. We're gonna start calling ourselves the intelligence host on this podcast. So we can kind of sound smart too. Okay, so Enverus obviously has gotten into a lot of things, and one thing that I think it's caught a lot of people's eye is the ESG space. So first of all, maybe the listeners who kind of heard the term aren't familiar with what ESG is. What is it, and why is Enverus interested in it? Because I know it's a controversial topic, at least from a historical kind of oil and gas perspective.
Yeah, 100%. So for those unfamiliar, ESG stands for environmental social governance, and it's a way to include new data sets into the investment process that was commonly overlooked in the past. So it's all about looking at a company's holistic environmental footprint, their board governance, like how aligned is their shareholder, how aligned is the kind of board's performance with shareholders, what's the diversity like at the company, and trying to look at, okay, if this company is going to be around for the next 20 or 30 years, is there any inherent risks that we're not taking into account when making these investments? And it's grown in popularity considerably over the last few years, really driven by the investment community. Like you have like funds like big funds like BlackRock and different large institutions that are essentially saying that this is essential for doing business now. And where we're coming at it from is there's a lot of data out there on a company's greenhouse gas profile or its environmental footprint that wasn't commonly looked at a few years ago by the investment community. Now the investment community is really hungry for that data, and they're hungry for that analysis. And that's what we do. Is we're a data company, we're a data analytics firm. So we set out to try to understand the landscape ourselves and essentially cast a wide net on the data that's available and bring that in and distill that into an easy to digest format for our clients.
So are you concerned that this could be used to weaponize against oil and gas companies? I mean, you see someone like Engine Number One who has threatened to, kind of put a lot of pressure on Exxon Mobil because they're not meeting their criteria. We can have there's kind of separate discussions. There's one discussion, which is what is the data, what's it useful for? And then there's also the kind of crazy folks who want to, if you say the word oil and gas, they want to sue you. So are you concerned that maybe you're playing into that narrative, and how do you balance that out?
So the way I look at it is it's obviously a pretty hot topic when you think about it, but there's naturally going to be people in this market who are who are just going to necessarily be against oil and gas. That's really not our target audience. Our target audience is not the investors who are divesting away from oil and gas, but the ones who are staying in and saying that, okay, we know that 10% of our portfolio needs to be allocated to energy, or we're an energy only investor. But we also understand that if regulations change, or if different aspects of the market change, then we need to understand what the underlying profile of our company is. So what we're doing is focusing on those clients there, because really that's that's the target audience. I'd say the ones who weaponize it are probably a little bit more on the fringe, and not they're not our clients. They're not the ones that we're providing data to. What we're trying to do here is make sure that regardless of whether Enverus provides this data, the investment community is looking for it. And what we want to do is make sure that both the operators and the investment community are on a level playing field, right? So that we understand what the data is, we're transparent about it. And, it's not like we're, coming up with this data ourselves. It's all from public sources. What we're doing is we're compiling that data and making sure that the conversation could at least be as unbiased as possible and as data driven as possible, which is really what we try to do. That's kind of our bread and butter.
So what sort of data are the investors looking for exactly? So are they looking at Well, you just answered the question. Is it methane emissions? Or what are some of the primary things that the investors are looking for?
Yeah, I'd say the 3 or 4 big ones. One of them is going to be a company's greenhouse gas emissions. Like we know that about 10 to 20% of emissions in a barrel of oil is from the production and that processing phase. So companies want to understand what that looks like, because it's really interesting. Like even if you look within a play, like you could look at 2 companies that are next door. One company might emit 6 times the amount of carbon dioxide per barrel of oil produced than its neighbor. So it's about understanding that nuance is pretty important. Stuff like flaring also tends to be pretty interesting for investors, just because if you could, companies with lower rates of flaring also have higher rates of they sell more of their gas, so it's a win-win in that situation. Methane emissions tend to be up there too. But when you look at ESG as a whole, a big one these days is a company's board governance metrics. So, how are executives being incentivized? How aligned is that with shareholders? And looking at those different kind of overall governance statistics are also really important. And then I would also throw in recycled water rates in certain areas too, tend to be looked at pretty favorably.
So one of the things that Ryan kind of just mentioned, that one concern is that certain companies can act almost as lobbyists for getting these rules formatted in a way that really fits their business model. One example we give a lot on the show is Pioneer. As soon as they make some updates to their carbon capture, they then try to encourage legislatures to pass laws that require these as minimum standards as soon as they get their stuff up to a certain level, which it makes sense on the Pioneer side, but it's also anybody can see what they're doing. One of the questions I have is, as these investors are looking for that, do you think that it's possible that they can use that to really put a lot of pressure on some of these smaller companies? Because I would venture, and I don't know this for a fact, you might actually correct me, a lot of these smaller companies are probably going to be in that class where they have 5 to 6 times the carbon emissions per barrel of oil. I mean, would it typically be the smaller companies that
it tends to be a bit of a scale for sure. What I've been pretty like the conversations that I have though is investors are really looking at peer group to peer group, and I think that's one thing that gets muddied when the data is not very transparent. Is you just look at, okay, Pioneer is going to be very public about their performance because they're using that as a as a way to try to get people to invest in their company. And then if you're a small company that that's the only data point out there, and that's what you have to benchmark yourself to. When the data becomes a lot more transparent, what we're allowing companies to do is, okay, let's not, if I'm a small single basin kind of private operator, I don't want to benchmark myself to Pioneer. I want to benchmark myself to other companies that fit my profile. So with the data more available, then it's like, okay, let's not look at, I'm not gonna show how I compare to Exxon, because that's not a necessarily fair statistic. Let me show how I compare to another mom and pop shop or another small private operator. So I think that that's where, when the data becomes more visible, you're able to do that. If not, then you're only allowed to, or you're kind of forced to compare yourself to the Pioneers and Exxons of the world.
Real quick, just since you mentioned that, I think that's a great point. Are you working with, or is Enverus working with the government officials to say, like, okay, guys, before you make legislation, understand that here's kind of the batches of organizations we have, and here's kind of how things work? Because one of the problems that we're very critical of government on this podcast is that they'll say something and it overly impacts the small guy, and then the big guys over there making money. So are y'all working with government officials to kind of show them how y'all think about this stuff?
We try to stay away from getting too political. Like we really try to find our place in the market is being unbiased and being like, okay, the investors care about these numbers and this type of analysis. We're going to try to be an unbiased view of that. Like, we don't have necessarily any skin in the game. Like, we don't buy any of the securities that we research or anything like that. So what we do is we just try to look at what is the what's changing in the market, and how can what's the best way to allocate capital right now. A lot of investors are, either doing this internally or being asked by their investors to understand the ESG profile of the companies that they own. And so that's where what we're going to do is we're going to take the available data. We're not going to, we're not going to work with, or we're likely not going to work with government to try to update those regulations or anything like that.
Yeah.
We're taking what's out there now, what's public, and distilling that down into a kind of an easy to digest format.
No one likes government. You come on the wrong podcast. You come on the right podcast. You want to bash government, so we could go there too. I was just curious because when you said that, it's like, okay, I wonder if government's not necessarily that you guys are trying to influence policy, but I wonder if government had reached out. But that's fine the way. Okay. One of the things you said a minute ago, I'm curious about is you said investors and what they're looking for. So if you kind of follow the narrative of the shell investor, after 2016, 2017, 2018, you kind of saw this narrative. Well, hey, we were incentivized you guys to go out there and drill and to continue to drill. We don't want to do that anymore. And then it was, we need returns. And then last year, obviously kind of reset the paradigm. So people were saying, well, the money's out, it's not coming back in. Some people are saying we'll come back in, the price is getting high. What are investors looking for? Because you've mentioned some of these things with ESG. So like, what are you guys hearing from investors, and how does that shape your research? Because I'm quite interested, because I do wonder what it is that's going to bring investors back to our market, because there's a lot of fear that the money might not come back for a long time.
Yeah, no, that's the $1 million question right there, is what are investors looking at. So that's what we spend a ton of time digging into, is trying to understand that dynamic. And also, I think that there's narratives that get put out in the market that don't necessarily show up in where investments are being made. So like a big one is like the only thing that investors care about is free cash flow, which is true, they do. But if you look at a company that is declining production to generate free cash flow, then they tend to not be looked at very favorably by the market. So the way that we look at things is it's a mix of three different things. A small rate of growth, so nothing crazy like we saw back in 2014 or 2015, it's a kind of single digit rate of growth. The ability to generate free cash flow is important, and then also the ability to have an overall strong environmental or strong ESG profile relative to peers. So if you could check those three boxes, those are really what investors are looking for today, is a combination of a little bit of growth, strong free cash flow yields, kind of like at least 10 to 15%, and then top tier environmental performance. That's kind of what the market is really trying to find these days.
Well, one quick follow-up on that real quick. We said peers a few times. Do you guys have like a certain number of sets of class of peers that are out there? Is it like there's 4 or 5 classes of oil and gas companies that you're saying, or is it like 2 or 3? Can you kind of break that down?
Yeah.
Break down what that means. Sorry.
Yeah, like I'd say that's pretty fluid, those groupings. Like we'll typically group the privates together, kind of this mid cap. So those would be your small and medium cap operators, and then your large cap operators together. So it's going to be dependent on the context. Like if you're looking at just within like in the Eagle Ford or just within the Permian, we might group a few of those together. They kind of go cross class a little bit, but it's usually grouped in those buckets. And then you'd have like your midstream producers, and then your OFS companies too, as separate groupings.
All right, so we had the Texas freeze that came out here recently, and there was a lot of news coming. Why did it happen? And both sides are kind of blaming. When I say both sides, there was the clean energy, the green side was blaming oil and gas was blaming other sectors of the industry. We actually had a guest on, David Blackman, and he talked about from his perspective that the industry, or I guess the government, was given subsidies and incentives for going green, and they weren't incentivizing coal or natural gas plants. And he said basically investors had no incentive to come in and invest in these baseload capacity, and that's why there was a shortage of energy. Not sure what all other variables are out there, but what is something that y'all are doing to I guess help people see the bigger picture as far as what's going on and what needs to happen in order to better understand the situation, why it happened, and what the solutions are?
No, it's a great question, and it was a really interesting time to follow the news that week when you're seeing a lot of different reasons come out, and in the media you're kind of seeing both sides of different arguments. And what I think I'm really excited with Inveris, and what we tend to do is we're very data driven, and we like to look at what the actual numbers say. So because in our view, the numbers don't tend to lie. And you could obviously present numbers any way you want to, but what we try to do is look holistically at what the numbers are telling us and use that to drive some type of conclusion out of. So like, I'm not the power analyst, so I don't want to go too deep into what happened in Texas the other week, but I think that some of the best arguments that I saw were ones that kind of objectively looked at the data and looked at what that said, and that's what we do at Inveris when we look at a play's economics. When we're looking at the amount of remaining inventory in the Permian, we'll take a very rigorous analytics approach that is also transparent, and then we could point to like, hey, this is exactly step by step how we estimate how many years of inventory this company has, or no, this is exactly how we're getting to this company being a strong ESG performer. And then that way there we could have that dialogue where a company, a client might want to say like, hey, why wasn't this number included, or why wasn't that number included? But I think that at least when you're starting from a point of data, then you could have that you could have I think a more thorough conversation. So
Okay. All right. Nick, let's, before we get you out of here, folks that are, want to find out more, they just want to talk to someone intelligent, just because that's nice. What should they do? Should they reach out to you? Should they reach the website? Where should they go? How do you connect? Tell us how to find out more about what you guys got going on.
Yeah, like you could always reach out to through our Inveris website if you're interested. You could reach out to me directly, and I'm on LinkedIn, Nick Volkmer. Also on email too, nick.volkmer@inveris.com. So a few different ways to reach out to us. But yeah, we're pretty active everywhere. So feel free to drop a note if you're interested.
All right, very good. Nick, it was lovely to get you on. And hopefully get you guys back on here in the near future. Best of luck to you guys and what you have going on over there at Inveris.
Yeah, awesome, guys. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah,
and
thanks, Nick.
It's a great podcast. So yeah, keep it going because we're almost at 200. It's exciting.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Bye.
Later.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks again to Nick Volkmer with Inveris for coming on. That was an interesting talk. Interesting talk, Ryan.
You got his name right. Look at you. Like
I did.
Nick,
I'm a name expert.
I was confident you could get Nick right. Volkmer. You got me messing it up.
Mixed up.
I didn't think you could nail that, but you did. And so I'm proud of you. I just want to title like the VP of Intelligence. Like that's what I want. That's a dope title. Of all the titles I've ever had, I've never had VP of Intelligence.
VP of Intelligence. Yeah, I should just be the intelligent co-host or the intelligent host, or what would you call it? I got to come up with a name. Something catchy.
Yeah, something catchy. Yeah. The dual intelligence. I don't know. We're not intelligent enough to think of it. That's why we're not. That's why we don't have those titles. We're not smart enough to figure it out on ourselves. So, okay. Let's see here. Closing shop. The War Room newsletter. Go check that out. We also have a nice piece about the Texas freeze. I'll try to include that in the show notes. But we'll put a discount code for a few bones off. Help out Josh and your boy. Thank you for getting to 300 5-star reviews. That means a lot to us. Now we got to get to 400. That's kind of next, right? We need 100. We need 100. And we need 100 5-star reviews, and we need all of the listeners to go sign up for the World Newsletter. Like if we had that, it would be the greatest March in a long time.
Yeah.
Listen, it can't be worse than last March, right? It can't be worse than last March. It can't be worse than last March.
Negative 37 on the oil. Shutdowns, lockdown. Stuck at home for weeks.
Oh, gracious.
That was brutal, man.
Oh, that was. It was brutal. Anyways, so thanks again, Nick, coming on the podcast. John for setting it up. It's always good to get the good folks at Inveris on the show. And I think we've had. I know we got some folks that are wanting to come on. I don't know if I've booked anybody, but I think we'll have a guest on here in the next couple of weeks. Anyways, we'll be back next week as always. Until then, keep climbing.